Hello, it's Tamsin.flower again, and I'm here today to talk about what's going on in the north of England that may not be immediately obvious. When we think of infrastructural change in the north, I believe we think of two things: sexy, exciting things like trains and bypasses. Who could forget the Preston bypass of 1958, which effectively is the UK's first motorway? And then there's High Speed 2, which we're all vaguely aware of. It was a grand ambition to move that train towards the north, but unexpectedly, the last government stopped it through overspending in the Midlands. And the North has always been somewhat emblematic of progress in the UK and certainly used to bandy around as a sort of totem of achievement by political parties. So, of Labour's new 45 billion investment into Northern powerhouse rail, Rachel Reeves recently said, if economic growth is the challenge, investment and renewal is the solution. That's why we're reversing years of chronic underinvestment in the North. Now, Boris Johnson had a levelling up campaign which said something slightly similar, to be expected. What did he say? He said, we're going to maximise the power of the North and we're going to make sure that its people are the ones who have control over the things that matter to them. This idea of devolving budgeting into the regions being a through line across the different governments. As the new government came into power, they quickly pushed through a slew of sustainability legislation, much of which flew under the media radar. However, it was wind power and the traction towards offshore wind farms that really created a lightning rod for commentators from the left and right to beef. The main bone of contention in the right-wing press predictably being cost. The cost of switching off these offshore wind farms that completely overwhelmed an old and inept grid was quite phenomenal. However, we now know that wind is actually the biggest source of electricity for homes in the UK. I believe it takes up around 17% of our energy provision, and that's renewable, which is fantastic. And according to the Energy Institute, it has also saved us since 2024 around 30 billion in imported fuels. According to Renewable Energy Hub, solar energy has hitherto provided around 5 to 6% of the UK's energy, with a focus on generation in the south and the southeast of England, somewhat in the southwest, and also around the Midlands. But that is set to change dramatically by 2030. A significant number of solar farm developments that are at various stages of approval and development are set to really cut through and change the landscape of the north of England, potentially in economically really beneficial ways, driving up household income locally, etc. However, there are counter voices to that, and I'll look into that later. However, with this shift in power generation, there is also the momentum of the Infrastructure and Planning Bill. And now we're entering the scintillating world of legislation. Now, the Planning and Infrastructure Act is a new piece that was passed in December 2025, and it's really the government's spearheading of the infrastructure needed to create this new clean energy revolution that will make us a powerhouse of clean energy by 2030 or beyond. And of course, there are various measures within it that smooth the planning development process. Interestingly, one of them is the doing away of the need for a Section 42 consultation for solar farms that produce less than 100 megawatts. What does this mean? This means that most solar farms, as many of them don't produce that much energy, won't have to consult with local groups, bodies, individuals, communities before developing. Now, this will be sad news for particular groups of people. So I think it's safe to say that accountability for consultations will rest more with the local councils than it will with these legally binding agreements which were previously used. Groups like Rooftops Not Countryside, North Yorkshire Against Light Valley Solar are opposed to these developments, not purely because they take up agricultural land that could be used for farming, but also because of the aesthetics and the sense of where they live. So they say, we chose to live in the countryside, not an industrial area, which is really about an individual enjoyment of an atmosphere, an environment, a tradition, I guess. I think it runs a lot deeper than simply taking up greenbelt land rather than previously developed land. Also, there's the aspect of biodiversity. Biodiversity groups will be very keen to monitor how solar farms are or are not being used in the most sort of permacultural and biodiverse way possible. And I'm sure the WWF has a lot to say about that as well. So, with that in mind, the WWF actually says when designed with nature in mind, large scale ground mounted solar sites offer several ecological advantages over intensively managed arable lands, so traditional arable farming land. Replacing heavily farmed land with diverse seed mixes, wildflowers, and native grasses creates ideal habitats for pollinators. And they talk of the reduction of pesticides and herbicides through natural use of botanical diversity. Conservation grazing, many solar operators utilise agricultural partnerships for sheep grazing. That's always an interesting sight and spectacle, which keeps vegetation under control while maintaining grazing land and fostering natural ecosystems. So basically, they're saying, done well, everyone and everything can benefit. But what does this all mean in numbers, I hear you say? Well, let's take a look. We have an open source map here, very handy, from www.solarinfo.uk/solar farms. Take a look. And here it's mapping 1,929 sites and 1,857 actual completed solar farms. Broken down by region, we can clearly see there has been an emphasis on the south and east of England, the Midlands, the west of England, and now the north of England is creeping up to around 300-ish mapped sites. I believe there are 22 sites mapped in Greater Manchester alone. In an ideal world, this new solar ecosystem, as connected by transport upgrades like the upgrades to the Trans-Pennine Way, as indicated by the King's opening of Parliament speech, will really create microeconomies that will thrive and invigorate these historically neglected towns. I really want to see that. Having migrated here from London post redundancy recently, I can really see the potential in areas that, if further down south, would be gentrified within an instant. The potential for beautiful views, a high quality of living, and really gelling with existing communities is all here and up for grabs. Last autumn, Ed Miliband unveiled the government's first plan to create 400,000 new jobs through clean energy by 2030. And these aren't jobs that are easily going to be absorbed by AI either. These are occupations like welding, carpentry, electricians, etc., as well as those more rarefied jobs that come with those new industries. So the future is potentially looking sunny. Well, look, never mind what I think. What do you think? Is your community about to be affected by the spread of the roots of this new solar economy in the UK? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it, like so many things, a grey space in between? Feel free to drop some comments. I'd be so interested to read them, including links to any groups you may be a member of that oppose new developments, for instance. My name's Tamsin. I am a playwright, a poet, a PR, and a journalist, but mostly a PR. And I currently live in the northwest of England, although sometimes in London. And I am going to leave this corner very soon to interview some of the architects of this new power shift. So stay tuned for that, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.